What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Today's episode is going to cover the Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Catholic Cathedral of the Diocese of Raleigh. So going to plug all of the church footage now, and then we'll come back after to discuss it in detail. So, as mentioned at the top of this episode, this cathedral is the Catholic Cathedral of the Diocese of Raleigh in North Carolina. This is, it was originally the first diocese in the state, and then the Diocese of Charlotte, which we covered or talked about through the St. Patrick's Cathedral episode a while back on the channel, came up later. The Diocese of Raleigh comprises mostly like the eastern part of the state, and the Diocese of Charlotte is more so like the western part. They kind of like draw a line in the middle of the state, if you will, and then it's east-west is kind of how it's divided. So this is the cathedral of the eastern part of the state, of the Diocese of Raleigh, and both are in the metropolitan province of the Archdiocese of Atlanta. So this one is similar to Charlotte in that regard. This cathedral may actually be like the most recent building in terms of like when it was constructed and completed that we've covered on the channel. I think it is. This one actually has like a very, very recent history. Construction was started in 2015 and it was dedicated in 2017, so less than 10 years old, which is kind of a crazy juxtaposition to some of the other churches and cathedrals we've covered that have, histories that are hundreds of years old. So I think it's interesting. It has definitely more of like a polished feel to the building is what I felt, and so much of that I think is because it is very new. So that kind of makes sense, and some of that, like, along with building like an additional history or lore of the space, some of that kind of like character and some of that just kind of comes with the wear and tear of time as it progresses. So it will be interesting to see kind of how the space changes and is transformed over the years. But it is cool that because this is a new building, like everything just feels very fresh, very, very new. And I was initially struck by just the size of I was not expecting the cathedral to be this large. I saw an article that was posted from a publication in local to Raleigh, and they said this was the 5th largest cathedral in the U.S. I think some of that doesn't necessarily mean church building, because there are some other spaces like minor basilicas and other churches that can be larger. But as far as like an actual cathedral building, this was said to be the 5th largest, which, I mean, it definitely makes sense to me. This it's over 40,000 square feet on the inside, so it's absolutely huge. The dome that I thought was very impressive is a little over 170 feet tall at its height. And then the bell tower that I really liked, I like how it was kind of offset from the main kind of like entrance, if you will. And then it kind of like adds a little bit of layer of dimension to it as you look back across like the bell tower and then towards the dome. But the bell tower is also like, it's like 150 feet tall. So it's a huge space. And I think it looks just like very impressive from the outside. I think something that I really liked is the statue of Jesus, and kind of like more like a courtyard area, like as you approach the main entrance doors. I like that kind of can orient you. Obviously, the name of this cathedral is also something that I like, being the Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral, something a little different as opposed to some of the other patron saints in a lot of churches or cathedrals that are named after Mary. So this, I think, just feels a little bit more unique. So I appreciated that about it. Obviously, there's a lot of brick on the exterior, so there's not like a ton of variation, I feel, but the height and the size of the building, and again, in addition to the dome and the bell tower, I think gives it a very impressive aura from the outside. And I mean, if you were to walk around the space to kind of get a feel for it from different angles or perspectives or whatever, I mean, it's a very, very large space. So it's definitely impressive. And this is in the Romanesque Revival architecture style. So to talk about the church a little bit in detail, so when you enter through the main entrance doors that showed in the video, there actually is a very, very large narthex, like way bigger, I think, than most. And I think that also, again, speaks to the size of the cathedral. And I guess I should mention before I get too far off, the main impetus for this building being constructed recently is similar to others that we've seen. The former cathedral of the Diocese of Raleigh is closer to downtown Raleigh. This new space is a little bit further out of downtown. It's very close to NC State's campus. But the original cathedral, I think it's called the Sacred Heart Cathedral, now called Sacred Heart Church, just was not big enough. And very clearly, like, this space is absolutely huge. I think it's said to concede around 2,000 people, 1,000 in the main nave, and then each side of the transept can seat 500, and we'll talk more about that, but that'd be a total of 2,000 people. So it's quite larger than the cathedral that came before it, so that was the reason for it. And again, I think this narthex space really speaks to that. It's a very, very large entryway. The confessionals are located off the narthex, and then there's also a smaller chapel that's located there, and you can kind of see like the end of the chapel, if you will, from the exterior of the building. You can see where it kind of juts out. And right after entering, there were, I don't know if they're volunteers or employees of the church, but were there to answer any questions and were very friendly and welcoming. But I chose not to film inside the narthex because they were like right there, so didn't want to like interfere with what they were doing or anything. So I didn't film that portion, but that is what awaits from like the immediate entry point from those 3 doors, and then there's a decent space, and then you enter the nave. So again, because like the size of the building and the dome especially, it's very impressive just in the scale of it. I think it kind of like when you first go in, you're kind of taken aback by just like how large it is. I think maybe it's one of the more like, I don't want to say controversial or whatever, but something that I think some people will like and something that other people will not like is, again, this cathedral does not have like a main patron saint that it's named after, but I think there's 24 or so statues of various prominent saints or other figures in the Catholic Church that are located around. They're really located like all the way through on either side of the nave, and then as you go and turn either to the left or the right, depending on what side of the altar you're at the transept, they go all the way around. I kind of had a thought of videoing just like walking around the whole thing, but it probably would have taken me at least like 15 minutes to get around it. So I gave just kind of like snippets of it. I liked a lot of the figures that were represented. I thought that was pretty cool and unique, but I think maybe like the art style of them, or the design of them was maybe just like a little too hyper realistic to me and not exactly what I was expecting. So that kind of took me back. As like the more and more I walked around, I think I came to like it a little bit more, but it definitely was something that felt a little jarring at first. So I wonder if other people that are maybe just like aren't as used to, visiting the space on a regular basis, like parishioners, but people that are just like interested in seeing the building or whatever, I'm curious to see what other people would think. But again, it was very unique. Some of the ones that I wanted to highlight are both St. Thomas More and St. Patrick, both of which we've talked about cathedrals that are dedicated to them. The most recent episode on this channel is the Co-Cathedral of St. Thomas More in Tallahassee. So I thought that was pretty cool to see that right after basically covering that Co-Cathedral. So again, I thought that was interesting. It wasn't necessarily my favorite thing, but it certainly was unique and different. And that's something that I did appreciate. As the space of this, it's quite large, but I feel like there wasn't a ton for your eye to kind of draw to besides like the height of the dome. There are very large columns throughout that I think kind of like separate the main portion of the nave or the transept like from closer to the side walls or turrets or whatever they're specifically called, where these kind of like statues are. And I think that helps in some ways from the perspective that if you're in the nave, that kind of like, even though it's a large space, it keeps you from having like too much that your eye's drawn to. It keeps your eye going like all the way down to the main altar. But it did, if you were walking underneath kind of like the archway of the columns, it did block your view and kind of like confine you into that little like space that felt like a hallway, if that makes sense. So I think it just had pros and cons. There were, as I showed, there's 14 Stations of the Cross, as we see a lot around. So if you were doing like a prayer walk around, I think the columns would be kind of an interesting and helpful addition there. But I think it just kind of, again, depends on somebody's personal preference. And then again, as mentioned, both the east and the west transepts are very, very large. They can seat up to 500 people each. And I enjoyed being in that portion maybe a little bit more because the nave, if you're sitting farther back because of the size of the building, I think your view of the main altar, the dome even, and the apse behind it is kind of blocked. So if you're in either side of the transept, you get a good view, I think, like of the altar, the dome, and then on the each end of the transept, there's a shrine to St. Mary and then a shrine to St. Joseph. So I think that that would be like my preferred portion of the cathedral personally, and that's where I enjoyed spending most of my time when I was there and that I was visiting. So that's definitely my preference. I thought the stained glass was amazing and very ornate, but compared to the scale of the building, it felt very small. So it definitely seemed like something that you would have to kind of like attune your eye to if you really wanted to take in like all the detail of it. So again, I thought that was interesting. It's not that every cathedral or major church building has to have massive stained glass. Again, I appreciate that this one's a little bit different in that regard, but the scaling of it did feel a little off at first because they are, especially those on like each wall of the end of the transept above those shrines, they felt very small. But kind of like throughout the nave, the smaller kind of skinnier stained glass windows between the statues of the patron saints were incredible to look at. Again, they were just a little bit on the smaller side. And then again, I think the altar is beautiful. It's really helped by having that impressive dome directly over top it. And then, I think that the tabernacle, which sits kind of in the asp a little bit behind the high altar at the kind of the front portion of that area, it's like a little like miniature cathedral, which I thought was kind of interesting. That felt a little unique to me and felt very fitting just because of like the dome of this cathedral specifically. But that was something that I thought was interesting and definitely like worth looking for. And again, I think the altar space in general, the cathedra or the symbolic seat of the bishop felt very intricate and ornate, which I thought was cool. But I think there's definitely there for your eye to be drawn to, for sure. So yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting space. It's definitely worth seeing and checking out because it is very impressive, and its size was definitely way larger than I thought it was going to be. I think again, some of the design of it can feel a little repetitive, and maybe like a little stark, just like a lot of like bright, like white kind of to it in the main interior. But again, I think that there's definitely some nuance and intricacies to it that makes it a little unique. And I am curious to see over time kind of like how the space will change. So I enjoyed getting to visit it. This was my first time seeing this cathedral. So hope you guys enjoyed getting to see it. And until next time, keep looking up.